This is SoundNotion, the weekly podcast for new music and music news. I'm Patrick Gulo.
I'm Dave McDonald.
I'm Nate Blyton.
I'm Sam Merciers.
And this week we are joined by composer and percussionist Robert Patterson. Rob has developed an innovative six-mallet marimba technique, which we'll be talking to him about, and he's got a new CD coming out this week called Six Mallet Marimba. Rob, thank you for joining us.
Thanks. I'm really grateful to be here. Great.
So, we were looking at the album cover earlier, and here it is. If you're watching the video version of the show, and you see Rob's six mallets sticking up, and we were talking about this just before the show started, and we decided that this reminds us a whole lot of Wolverine, and so we've decided to call this the Wolverine grip. Can you tell us about this technique and how it came to be?
Yeah, sure. So approximately 20 years ago, I was in undergraduate school, and one summer I was hanging out with a girlfriend I had at the time and just fooling around. I just picked up six mallets just because they happened to be sitting on the instrument, and I just started playing a little pattern for her just as a kind of a joke, because she said, "Oh, play me something," and so I started goofing around. But I picked them up and it worked, so then I started fooling around with it, and I was studying with a percussion teacher named John Beck at the time, who was kind of like, to me, like the Dorothy DeLay of percussion teachers. He's turned out a lot of great students. And one day I showed him what I was up to, and he says, "You know what?" He says, "Why don't you just not play in the orchestra and do all that stuff? And if you want to just focus on this for the next few years as a percussion student, you can do that." And so then I just took it from there. And for the last 20 years, I've been kind of developing it and writing pieces for it, getting people to write me pieces, and so on.
So I want to just point out that, like most innovation, this started off as a way to impress a girl.
Absolutely. And, I find that a lot of my life is whether it's with my wife now, who I'm still trying to impress, or anybody else. I mean, I'm a percussionist. I started playing drums for the same reason. So
Right.
I guess I've always had this, insecurity built into my, wanting to impress the other, the other sex, I guess. So
I thought you were going to say, one day I was hanging out with Hugh Jackman and we just got talking.
Well, what's funny? Victoria, my wife's a violinist and plays on Broadway, and she's doing Radio City right now, and she's met Hugh Jackman and all these people. So I have to just get used to the fact that she's going to meet guys that are 1,000 times hotter than me every day, all week, all year. And I'm used to it now. I just
Right.
met Tom Cruise, or I just met so-and-so. I'm like, oh, okay.
Well, and so to compete, you have the six mallet marimba grip.
Exactly. I have that
Right.
thing.
That's your special thing. So,
That's the thing.
you're also, we should say, not just a percussionist. You also write a lot of music, and I think that probably makes sense for someone that's developing this new technique to write some music for it.
Right.
So, where did that come in? Did you start off? I assume you started off as a percussionist. I don't know if anybody starts off in music as a composer.
Yeah, and woe to those who do. I don't know. I've never met too many that. Well, no, I'm being silly here, because there are some really great
Sure.
young composers that start out that way. But I started out, mostly wanting to write pieces. I didn't like the repertoire for percussion ensemble when I was a kid, and so I got together with some friends who were also percussionists. So why don't we? I'm going to just write a piece. Is that okay? Because I don't like what's out there, and I'm sure So Percussion and a lot of groups that are out there do the same thing. They're just not happy with everything. So I wrote that piece, and then my parents saw what I was doing, and they said, "Oh, maybe you should take lessons or something." And I said, "Sure, I'd love that." And so I took some composition lessons. So one thing led to another, and now I think I'm much more of a composer than a percussionist, actually.
Yeah,
I spend most of my time composing. So
that's very cool. Do you ever worry about that time balance? I know I grew up playing trumpet, and at some point there was this shift where I wanted to keep playing trumpet, but I ended up spending more time that I would have ordinarily spent practicing writing. And it was always a struggle for me. Have you had this experience?
Oh, absolutely. And I still, every day, even today, I mean, I have some composition work to do, but I also have to practice for this concert coming up. And every day is just a balancing act of, okay, this is how many hours I have. And, I need to put these hours for practicing mostly until the concert. Then after the concert, I can get back to really writing some music or doing that. So it's a struggle. And that's actually one of the reasons I'm not one of the gig pigging percussionists. I don't go out there and do road gigs. I've done my share of messiahs when I was younger. I don't need to do that anymore. That's what percussionists do. They do timpani around the city, unless you're in the New York Phil,
Right.
or in a show like Broadway. This is at least in New York, or unless you're a teacher. or all of the above or whatever. But I guess each of us chooses our own path. And so for me, I focus my performing energy on just mostly the marimba, and occasionally I'll do other percussion gigs. And at this point, I do it for fun, and I keep my chops up like this concert we're about to do. But I mostly have resigned myself to just wanting to compose. So you pick and choose your battles, I guess.
Yeah. And so now I gather from this CD that you've obviously spent a lot of time writing for yourself. Is you write, I would assume, for a lot of other musicians as well that don't play percussion.
Oh yeah.
And I'm curious about how you see the difference between those two, writing for yourself, especially when writing for yourself with this 6-mallet technique is so specific.
Yeah.
And how that translates to things that you do for other people.
Well, that's a really interesting question. I mean, the 6-mallet technique I'm using, I'm not the only one who can play with 6 mallets, although I've probably taken this technique further than pretty much anybody, I think. But I'm trying to get other people interested in it. Mm-hmm. And so the whole point of this album and all these pieces, and even the few that I've had other composers write for me, is I want to go out in the following year and tour around and play at schools and demonstrate how to do this so other people can start doing it. Because frankly, I'd like to not be the only one doing this, I certainly don't hoard this, But it's funny. A lot of marimba players, like this concert I'm about to do at the Rubin in New York here, the Rubin Museum of Art with Makoto Nakura. He does know how to play with 6 mallets a little bit, but his technique's a little different than mine. So, I probably could have coerced him into doing it. But, I know he's more comfortable playing with 4. So I wrote this marimba duo called Mandala for the 2 of us, both for 4-mallet parts. And, it's funny what you think of when you're working with a performer. For us, we both kind of laughed and said, well, and he said, okay, let's play something together if you feel like writing something that's great, but just don't make it too hard because we both know we have so much other music to learn for the concert. So I purposely made the piece a little easier. Like I didn't bust his chops or mine either, for that matter. I tried to write something we can actually learn in a reasonable amount of time,
That's interesting. I wonder if maybe we could all learn something from that for writing for other people. Like not everything needs to drive the performer crazy bananas.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a time and a place for that. I think some of the greatest pieces are some of the ones that are knuckle busters, or Fairney Ho-esque or something. But
yeah.
But I don't think every piece has to be like that. And as you know, as we all know, some of the most beautiful or best pieces in the world are not the ones that are the killer pieces. But I think we've all been trained in one way or another. At least I was when I was going to school. That you weren't really a respectable composer unless you were taking it to 11. Like the whole tap thing. Like no, push it to the extreme. Make the fingers, the player's fingers bleed. then all of a sudden you're respected. Oh wow, you really made them struggle and sweat. You're so great.
And those are the composers that we study in school. Like we study people like Milton Babbitt, and we study people like you mentioned Fairney Howe, and that's one of the things that we say about them is look how crazy hard this music is to play.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, well, there's stuff to talk about.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I mean, so I think I love doing it sometimes, but I think I don't want to have to feel like for the rest of my life I always have to do that. And by the way, I mean. The way I wrote the piece, because I know the instrument so well, it sounds a lot harder than it is because it's so rich. Yeah. We're both playing constantly. It's like this moto perpetuo, really full harmonic sounding thing. But technically, if you look at the parts and you're a marimba player, you know that it's not that difficult. Well, so I think part of the art is you can fool people a little bit if you know what you're doing. So
yeah, I think that's something that I hear a lot from composer performers is that they are able to write something that sounds very impressive that is not actually very taxing because they write for the things that are comfortable for them to do. And I feel like you hear this a lot in jazz improvisations. Like in general, there are some exceptions to this for sure, but in general, when you hear something like that sounds really fluid in a jazz improvisation, they're choosing that in part because it feels good for them to do that,
Right. Yeah. I agree. And so I think there's nothing wrong with, taking into consideration the art of how to play the instrument. It is an instrument, after all. It's being played by a human being. There's nothing wrong with realizing what sounds good or feels good on the instrument. I mean, this is why Eric Whitacre is so popular, the choral composer, because the way he writes, it just feels good for the singers to sing. And it also makes the conductors look good, and it makes rehearsal time. They can rehearse things on an academic level. I hate to say it like that, but it's true. I've heard them say This is what they say, you know.
He doesn't need to look good.
Well, no, and he's got
He's got the hair.
Comes to him.
on contract now or something. I mean,
Yeah, he's a model.
He's a model.
Yeah.
Composer / model, which is I think a career that we really all aspire to.
Oh,
Yeah.
you know,
And
so few of us
not-
have
but-
reached that, you know.
But not model / composer.
Yeah.
Composer first, at least.
So
Yeah.
you
Hey, Rob.
you could go for it, Sam.
Rob, I've got some questions specifically regarding the technique itself.
Sure.
No, if I'm not mistaken, like using 3 mallets per hand is something that's it's not like it's never been seen before.
Right.
This takes place in Latin American music. I
Oh,
mean,
yeah.
I'm not,
Yep.
I certainly can't comment, about the specifics, but I know my family visited Tijuana when I was a very young child, and I very specifically remember a guy, but it seemed to me it was more like, percussion as in, rhythmic, not like
Right.
melodic, fixed
Yeah.
position and just kind of going up and down. I actually roomed with a percussion major when I was doing who was doing his master's degree. So I've seen a lot of marimba practice go down, and I've seen the grip and how you control the interval. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about how the grip actually works, because I'm wondering like individual stick control, how that works in this context, because I've seen a lot of that practice done for a 4-mallet player.
Right. By the way, just for the record, there is a video on YouTube right now, me showing Makoto how to do this, where you can actually see me hold the mallets and grip them in my hands and everything, so he can see it.
We'll have a
we
link to
can-
that in the show notes.
Actually, we could actually drop that in post.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Maybe I'll do that right here
Yeah.
through the magic of whatever.
Through the magic of
6
Do this
mallet
so we can
marimba.
pay.
yeah, right.
Ah.
So one of the things I want to show you today is that, Makoto normally plays with 4 mallets, and what I'm going to play in the concert that evening is mostly with 6 mallets. So when a percussionist holds 4 mallets, that's what it looks like. So what I do, at least with what I'm going to do, is I'm going to hold 6 when I play, 3 in each hand. So, okay, take 2 mallets in one of your hands, maybe your right hand. And what I'm using is what's called the Burton grip, based on a vibraphonist named Gary Burton. So it's flipped over a little.
Yes.
Yeah, so like that.
Yep.
And then you take the 3rd mallet and put it on top, like that. I know. Uh-oh.
Oh, that's very unusual. Okay. Okay, like that.
Hopefully not too unusual. So then you close your fingers and put your index finger there. So you put your ring finger on the outer mallet. So this mallet there, like that.
Like that.
That's it.
Wow.
Pretty much. Not too bad, right? Wait, let's turn over again. Let's see if you got it almost.
Mhm.
So, yeah, that's it. Yeah, you got it. Look at that. In like 30 seconds, he did it. See? Not too bad. I feel like I'm advertising one of those food gizmos, right? And so when you get further along with this, you can actually, do things like play a little independently, like that, or you can, play chords using obviously the flats and sharps, things like that. And there you go. That's how you hold 6 mallets.
And we're back from 6 mallet marimba.
Well, yeah, but let me tell you a little about how the difference. Okay, first of all, let's get something out in the open for a second. Okay, let's address the elephant in the room. Okay,
Do it.
a lot of these CD covers you see, and posters, and images, and even these things in like Mexico, Central America, whatever. These guys, first of all, they're not really doing much with the mallets, and they hold them up to look impressive, but they're not really doing anything. They're playing like block chords on the white keys,
Right.
like C major triads and so on. And that's definitely not what I'm up to. I'm playing all kinds of mixed intervals and big spans and rolling with one hand and things like that. I've tried to make this not a novelty.
Right.
Right.
That's the problem. Is I think most of the time people hear about this, even other percussionists, I get a lot of flack for this. I'm like, oh, it's just a novelty until they see me do it. Whoa.
That's all right.
Ignore that. So, anyway, sorry about that.
No problem.
So I think it's not a novelty, at least to me. I view it as kind of as something that's viable and real. But okay, now the thing about those percussionists down in Central America, I was just down in Mexico recently and I saw a guy do this, and it's very, it's not something that, again, they're not really moving their mallets very much. They're kind of.
Right.
They're just holding the mallets. And by the way, a lot of times the mallet shafts. God, I'm so sorry about that.
That's all right.
The mallet shafts are they're like whittled shafts.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So they're not even smooth, so they can't really move the mallets much at all without making their fingers bleed.
Yeah.
So anyway,
Well,
so, yeah, that's my.
yeah, I mean, that's basically what I wanted to cover so that nobody will have reason to place a comment on the site saying they've been doing this with 3 mallets in Mexico for years, blah, 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 blah.
And I should say, in that video that we watched, you demonstrate, and I think it's really impressive. And when I first heard about your 6 mallet thing, I was thinking that, and you demonstrated individual strokes from each mallet, and how you could change the spacing of the chords, and that was when I was convinced.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Oh,
and it wasn't until I saw that I thought, this is a guy that would be worth talking to. So I'm glad that you mentioned that, because it is an important distinction between what you're doing and the older tradition. Now we should say that this is not to denigrate that music, because that's the appropriate thing for the style of music that they're playing, right?
And let me make this perfectly clear, by the way. I love that music down in Guatemala and Honduras. You know what? Let me just disconnect.
Yeah, I was gonna say. This is that's all right. Well, Robert, that's what I always think whenever somebody is holding their laptop and walking around from place to place. It looks like Darren Aronofsky. The thing where they showed the face and anyway. If you haven't seen any Darren Aronofsky movies, they all have that. So
sorry, man. I'm gonna walk around with my laptop for a second.
No, that's all right. So this is the Darren Aronofsky thing that I'm talking about.
He's reporting for us.
Yes.
Somebody really wants to bother me.
That's all right. No worries.
Yeah. Okay.
So,
got it.
I'm curious about the music that you write for this. What kinds of things does this technique allow you to do musically that you couldn't do with 4 mallets?
Okay, well, first of all, the obvious aspect of it that I think the composers who write for this technique really embrace, because it's kind of cool, is that the harmonies can be a little richer.
Yeah.
And then what the biggest mistake they make when they start writing for this technique is they start treating it's like being a kid in a candy store harmonically. Now I can write all these block 6-note chords. And that's actually not a great way of using the technique. I compare writing for marimba, especially with 6 mallets, more like writing for guitar or harp or something like that.
Yeah.
Where you might use all your fingers at once for certain chords and textures and so on, but you're not going to do that all the time because it's boring. But I think one thing you can do a lot of alternating of 2 mallets and 1 mallet in one hand and the other hand really quickly. You can you can do triads in one hand and a melody in another. That's really cool. You can also, if you lift up the middle mallet with your index finger, this is how the technique works. You can actually play one-handed rolls in either hand very easily, which is one thing I know for sure that almost everybody I've ever seen try to use 6 mallet technique, they don't usually do. They don't even know how to do it. And by the way, there are 6 mallet grips based on, in the percussion, the land of percussion, there's 3 very standard grips that techniques are based on that everybody uses. There's this marimba player named Lee Stevens. Right. And he has that was based on the Musser grip. There's all this history in percussion, kind of like everything else, My grip is based on a grip that a vibraphone player named Gary Burton uses. If you know anything about jazz or fusion, he's like a giant in that field. He's like the dean of Berkeley in Boston, I think.
Okay.
Anyway, so that's where my technique comes from, and and it's funny. And then percussionists get really ornery about it, because if you don't, I've been giving a few master classes recently, and they say to me, they go, "That's great, Rob, but is there a version of this that uses my technique, the Lee Stevens Musser technique?" And I look at them and say, something, I don't know, man, this isn't like camp, or this isn't like football teams. I mean, I'm just using this because it works for me. But if you need to find a technique that works with that grip or something, great, but I can't show you because I've tried. I couldn't make that work. So I used to play the Lee Stevens Mutz or whatever it is, but I stopped doing because it was kind of useless. I mean, I was getting blisters on my fingers, and I didn't find that it was doing what I wanted, and so I just kind of stopped.
Yeah, it's a weird thing with musical technique is that it can become very dogmatic, and
Exactly.
it's like if it works, do it. You know, and I think we have a similar thing in composition where at least I, as a young composer, would sometimes ask, like, "Is this okay? Can I do this?" And my teacher was like, "Don't be an idiot. You can write whatever you want. You're the composer."
I would love to see a series of etudes revolving around this technique. Like, you can see somebody with a book, walking around so and so music school, of this kind of technique.
Right. Well, so the plan is my evil plan is and then by the spring I'm going to have a book and an app in the iTunes App Store.
Very cool.
App will have exercises, and as far as etudes, it's going to probably take me a little. I am planning on doing that actually. So.
Oh, great! Look forward to it.
Very cool.
There's a guy named Kai Stensgaard who has one out there, but I don't know, man. I'm just can't. I respect him a lot because he's done a lot for the whatever you want to call it, the field of six mallet playing, but we're very different, I think. His music, if you listen to it for a few minutes, you'll see what I'm talking about. I mean, he does those white note chord things, So it's funny I'm saying that because in the marimba, it's all, wood notes, rosewood.
Yeah, right.
No, it's
closer notes.
I have a geeky composition technique question.
Oh, I love it. Okay.
So, I've seen, in two mallet technique, you'll see sometimes where they sandwich a bar that you can reach from the side.
Right.
Do you ever do that with three? So there's one on top or two on top and one on bottom, so you can go up and down like that?
It's funny you mentioned that and that you were talking about what you were talking about before, because that's called a Guatemalan roll. And now I guess there's the six mallet version is that I can do that. It's funny. It's not the kind of technique you use very often because you can only do it on the bottom bank of keys. The rolls. It's fun. I like doing it, but there's not usually many opportunities to do that, so it actually works elegantly with a composition, unless the composer specifically writes for that, which I think is cool. I think it should happen.
This is interesting. You mentioned the guitar and the harp, and the sorts of things that we're talking about in the geeky nuts and bolts composery way. These are the sorts of there are certain instruments that are so different from the other instruments we write for that they're just a completely unique animal. And you mentioned guitar and harp, and those are two others along with marimba and a handful of others, like organ maybe, that deserve special consideration. And you can't talk you can talk about clarinet and how clarinet-ish things might apply to oboe or flute or saxophone, but you can't do that really with marimba. I'm wondering, another question I had looking at your grip, one of the differences between vibraphone and marimba is that the vibraphone is all flat, it's all one level, and the marimba's got two levels, and I'm wondering how you manage to go between those with your six mallet grip. And
is it universal?
If there are any problems with certain mallets being on the top row and on the bottom row and vice versa.
It's funny, and it's a subtle part of this technique. I wish, actually, I guess try to put my laptop on my marimba, which is right behind me, actually, to show you. But you have to actually lift up very carefully. It's very subtle because it's like tiny little muscle movements, but you do compensate for that tier difference on a marimba. So you do that. When you're using this technique, if you don't want kind of what we call in percussion land flams, so it goes badunk, badunk like that. So I do when I'm playing, I actually will compensate and put the lower mallets a little lower and the upper mallets so that the chords land solidly, But like you said, on a vibraphone, you don't have to worry about that at all, which is great, In an orchestra bells, which are very small usually, it's barely noticeable. You wouldn't notice if you if the mallets were level, you wouldn't be able to tell, for very little. So, but yeah, it's part of the art of how to do it on a marimba, and that's the other thing. There are vibraphone players who've explored this perhaps even more than marimba players, and especially in the land of jazz. But that's definitely it's not something that can't be transferred over to the marimba. That's all I'm saying.
All right.
Yeah.
Very cool. So tell us a little bit about some of this music that you've written. I feel like we've spent a lot of time talking about the technique, and it's really interesting and cool to talk about. But I don't want the technique to overshadow the resultant music, because that's the thing that we really care about. Like, the technique is just a means to an end.
Oh, that's so nice of you to say that, because people get so enamored by the technique. They're like, "Oh yeah, there's music, right? That's right." You know, I'm like, that's the whole point.
Well, it is cool, and watching the video, like, it's very impressive. But it's the sound that's really the thing that we care about, or should care about.
Yeah. I mean, the whole reason I have fun with this technique, or I love my instrument, I love playing the marimba, you know, is because of the sound it creates, and the music. I love exploring the different possibilities with the technique, with the music, you know. So, you know, so a question I get asked a lot is, and even Makoto, when I wrote him a piece, this particular marimba player, by the way, is one of my favorite marimba players in the whole world. And he said to me, he goes, "Well, I don't usually ask percussionists to write me pieces because they write me bad pieces, like that sound like a percussionist wrote it." And that's typical in the percussion world. It's kind of like violinists writing violin pieces. They all start to sound like modern versions of Wieniawski or Paganini or something like that.
And I was going to mention that, but I didn't want to sound like, I'm glad that you said it, is what I'm saying. Because so much of it sounds like, you know what it often sounds like to me is drumline.
Yeah. Well, percussionists like certain things. You know, I have to admit, by the way, right up front, in case anybody hears this piece at the concert that I just wrote, Mandala, I purposely wrote a piece that I knew percussionists would like. I like it. I love the piece. I think it's beautiful. But I definitely knew in the back of my mind, oh, percussionists are going to like this piece because it does percussion-y things, you know. Right. It's got these alternating rolls and fifths on the instrument that sound really good, and the intervals aren't that hard. And it's a lot of fun to play. Makoto and I are having a blast playing it. But you know, it definitely it crossed my mind. His concern for me was, try not to write pieces that are, like, basically, he knows as well as I that when a percussionist stands at the instrument and writes, they get overwhelmed with how it feels to play the instrument, and that starts to overtake their compositional process. And so that's why I try not to write at the instrument, or I'll sit at a piano or at my desk, and then I might go to the marimba to check something and make sure it's actually doable. And occasionally I'll tweak something, but I know the instrument well enough that I know what's possible, basically. But so that's my process, is I don't usually write at the instrument.
Can I just say
that's a big part.
That's a little disheartening to me as a composer, that even you, as a very, very, very experienced marimba player, have to go over to the instrument and check. Like, what chance do I have?
Let me say firsthand, I mean, this is what the best pieces I ever see from composers are usually, for the marimba, I mean, are when they work with a percussionist and consult with them, and actually will say, "Hey, do you mind if I come over to your place? We'll have some pizza, or, you know, a glass of wine or something, whatever. And can you try this out for me so I can see how it's working?" Because if you try to hole yourself up and be in a bubble and think that there needs to be this wall, you know, between the two of you, I find that collaboration is a really good thing that way. Yeah. And even Makoto, just yesterday, I was just rehearsing with him in his rehearsal studio, and there were a couple things that we tweaked and changed between the two of us, because we both, you know, were discussed things as well. This will work better if we actually let the roll up earlier and then come back down here and give ourselves a little room to breathe. Or maybe here I changed some accents, because lining up, it was hard for us to line up. I put an accent on the last 16th of one part of phrase and the first 16th on my part. And so he kept thinking I was off. And so, you know, I realized that, you know, musically speaking, it's not going to change the feel if we just line up the accents on the second half of these bars. So I just moved some of the accents, which isn't that awesome as a composer when you can change your own piece. Love that.
Yeah. No, I love that. And a lot of times I feel like there are performers that are very dogmatic about, like they feel like there's some special magic to what the composer has originally conceived, and are wary to ask for those kinds of changes. And I'm very open to them as a composer. And I agree with you. Some of my favorite pieces that I've written are pieces where I've had a lot of that really one-on-one collaboration with the performer. And it's in part because they think of things that I wouldn't have thought of, but it's also, I think, at least a little bit, because they play the piece so much better.
Right. Yeah. Well, and that's the thing you have to remember is that, you know, it's okay if a piece has been around for 50 years and it's been played hundreds of times. Okay, maybe all the kinks have been worked out. Although, by the way, you get old music all the time with mistakes all over the place. Yeah. Sometimes they don't bother rechecking everything or re-engraving. But then the other thing is, you know, if you're working on a piece that is brand new, you have that leeway to change things. And there's no I think we get all caught up in the Amadeus thing. We're like, oh, it's perfect. It's got to be perfect as it's put on the page. And by the way, that's another load of malarkey. You know, I mean, all his sketches were thrown out. You know, his wife threw out his sketches, Mozart. You know, so it's kind of like we don't really see the true Mozart. It's been colored by films and books and romanticizing everything. You know, but you know, the truth of the matter is that all that matters is that the piece sounds great in the end. So whatever process you have to do to get there, fine. You know, it's like. And for me, I've given up. I'm not pretentious about this stuff at all anymore. To me, it's like it's about the end result.
Yeah.
And if it means I have to like stand on my head to come up with an idea, or like throw my music as paper airplanes around the apartment, and that's going to inspire me, whatever, you know.
That's great. I love that. So can you tell us maybe a little bit about some of this music that's on the CD? Sure. You've got a lot of stuff. You've got some stuff for solo marimba, but you've got a lot of stuff for marimba and one other instrument, and usually a solo line instrument. And I think that is a really interesting thing to me. And I assume you're working with these individuals that played on this album.
These are all members of the American Modern Ensemble, correct?
Right. Yeah. So you know,
we haven't talked about that at all. I'm sorry.
Oh no, it's okay. So yeah, I have an ensemble in New York. This group, AME, American Modern Ensemble, and all the members, all the people on the CD that I'm playing with are in the ensemble. And it's fun because they're all friends of mine, and we've worked together for years. And it's just I automatically had, because I have this group, I had access to some really good players who I just wanted to play music with anyway, because it's just a lot of fun to work with them. And so it was easier for me. I didn't just have to go around and find ad hoc players around the city or something, around whatever. But anyway, each piece is different. There are 2 solos, Komodo and Piranha. That I start the CD with, just so people say, oh, it's not just all, you know, duos or something. Then there's 2 duos for violin, Braids and Links and Chains. There's a piece for sax and alto sax and marimba, Tongue and Groove. And then there's, a piece for oboe and marimba called Stillness, piece for bass clarinet and marimba called Clarinetrix. So, and then the final piece, I hope I'm not missing it. Oh, there's a duo for flute and marimba. That's the longest piece, 3 movements. And then finally, there's a piece for tuba and marimba, and that's actually the earliest one. I wrote that when I was 20, you know. And I wrote that studying with Chris Rouse, by the way, and I don't think he's heard the recording yet, but I don't think of it. I mean, this is like... Okay, let's talk about that for a second.
Go ahead.
Tuba and marimba. It sounds pretty cool, I think, actually. And the tuba player, Dan, is great. Plays with Ice, by the way, as well.
Nice.
International Contemporary Ensemble. He's a great guy, wonderful player. Anyway, so that piece, I did tons of revisions on that piece. I just butchered the hell out of that thing. I mean, I looked at what I wrote when I was 20, and now I've had 20 years later, approximately. I looked at that thing, and I was like, oh, man, I got to fix. There's so much that was wrong with this. And some will say, like I studied with Steve Stuckey for a while when I was getting a doctorate. He's like, well, you shouldn't go back, and it's not worth going back and revising some things. Just move on. And I'm like, well, okay, I get that point of view, but I'm also like, well, what if I'm older now, and I want to fix. It was horrible. There were so many problems with it. And now I'm actually pretty happy with it. I think it sounds okay.
It's always things that you think to yourself, why didn't I see how easy it was to fix that problem back then? Why does it look so easy to fix now?
So I mean, I definitely get, sometimes you should cut your losses. You wrote a horrible piece, let it I mean, that. But, or, you know, and not everybody writes a master. Everything that comes out of them is their new Mr. Holland's opus, the best thing they've ever written. I'm being silly, but, you know. But I think in this case, you know, this particular piece, I thought, you know, I loved it. I thought it was kind of cool and interesting. There's very few pieces like that. Tuba and marimba, who would have thunk it kind of thing. And I was like, I'm just going to fix it. You know, and then by the way, there are pieces I've thrown out. I mean, I have a bunch of, I don't know if you all do the same thing, but there are a couple pieces I had from when I was younger that I wasn't happy with, and they're gone. I just basically had like a bonfire. I just got rid of them, you know. I think I flushed one down the toilet. I don't even know. I was like, that's horrible. I got to get rid of that, you know. I mean,
keep them around in case there's any motivic material in there that you might want.
Yeah, sometimes I've done that too. I have one piece. It's an orchestra piece I wrote when I was younger, an overture, and I'm probably eventually going to take a few melodic strands out of it or a few ideas, and I'll probably get rid of the piece or at least put it away. And then I might turn it into a new piece later. But, you know, I don't know. I find that we all get caught up in the composer world with these notions. Like, number one, don't quote anything. there are a lot of composers that hate quotation, and if you quote anything, you're automatically like a bad composer. Well, okay, then if in that line of thought, how many authors are bad authors because they use quotes in their books? That's silly. To me, it's silly. It doesn't mean you're less creative. In fact, every composer throughout history who's worth their salt has quoted something, used ideas by somebody else. Beethoven, Mozart, Bach, everybody, you know? So who cares? I guess my whole point with this little exercise is, you know, I don't believe in the whole pretension that surrounds so much of what.
Oh no, I lost your audio.
Yeah.
Rob, are you there?
Hold on a second.
Oh, there you go.
Here.
Really? Am I here again?
Yeah, you're here again.
Oh, that was interesting. I don't know. Yeah.
It wasn't the whole monologue. It was just the very end. So we're good as far as that goes.
All right. Yeah.
No,
So Rob, go ahead, Dave.
I was going to say I go back and forth on that. Like you, there are some times when I think, well, I won't make that mistake again. But if it's a small thing, and especially I think if it's something that you're going to record that is going to represent you now and forever, fix it. I mean, I guess that the option wasn't record the piece that you're not happy with or not record. It was fix it or just don't record it.
And
I think I would.
I did go back and forth because actually the irony is that early piece is definitely the hardest one by far. It's very difficult. And so I almost didn't want to put it on the CD because I thought, well, it's very early, doesn't really represent me now at all. All these other pieces were much later. But then I thought, you know, do I have to run away from the fact that, do I have to be insecure about something I wrote when I was 20? I mean, and then, of course, I often ponder this, how we're all, you know, composers are still emerging when they're in their 40s. I'm like, so let's see. Let me get this straight. You're emerging after Mozart died.
Mm-hmm.
That's an interesting conundrum. I've never thought of it that way, but we do talk about emerging composers at least into their 40s sometimes.
Right. And I know we're all living longer lives, but so does that mean that 100, 200 years from now we're going to be emerging when we're 80? When we're Elliot Carter's age? You know?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. It's just crazy, you know? So it's something I just think about a lot, how age is this big factor, you know, how some performers or composers, if they're younger, they're idolized, or maybe if they're older. And then if you're in this middle area, it's like, yeah, it gets a lot harder because you don't have youth working for you, or you don't have the fact that you're 103 and can still walk on stage, you know?
Mm-hmm. Well,
So-
and
Yeah,
you can't apply for any of those young composer anythings anymore.
Right.
That's right.
I feel the same way. I mean, you hear about people who really are significant composers. They're all over the place. People like Mason Bates. I've heard people refer to Mason Bates as an emerging composer. The guy is not an emerging composer. He's a composer in residence at the Chicago Symphony. I mean, he's been all over the place. He's anything but an emerging composer.
Right. I mean, just for the record, I think the world of Mason, I think what he's doing is he's got his own look, his own voice. He's done things that most composers would, you know, love to have his situation. But I mean, the one thing about him that's interesting is, and let's just again address the elephant in the room kind of thing. He's a good-looking guy. He takes care of himself. He takes great photos, kind of like the Eric Whitacre thing. People love that. He looks good. It's part of the package, but this is beside the fact that he's got the goods. He can really compose, you know?
Yeah.
So I think we have to think of that sometimes, that, you know, there's nothing wrong with with the fact that you need to appeal to people that are focused on their eyes. It's just the way it is. Once you come to terms with that and you're at peace with that, and then you're like, okay, people are driven by their eyes a little bit. Get over it. And then you realize, it's fine. I got to deal with it. It doesn't mean the content has to suck. You know, it just means your music should still kick butt. It should be really good. But it's okay to look good, or you try to look okay, you know, like Mason or something. I mean, whatever. That's a good thing, because people, that's the first thing they see. They often don't hear his music. They see what he looks like and go, oh, he looks like one of us, or he looks like somebody I want to get to know. So anyway, I mean, but that's not taught in schools. In schools, it's like, no. If you write it, they will come. And just write music, and that's all you have to worry about.
Right.
Yeah, well, we could talk for years about all the problems that we have with the educations that we all got at the music schools that we went to. And I would love to have that conversation sometime, and I would love to keep talking to you about this stuff. But I'm worried that the show is going to end up being 17 hours long. So I'd like to move into some of our news stuff this week. We're probably going to cut a lot of stuff on the fly, but the one thing that we absolutely should discuss, cannot overlook, and is the death of Elliot Carter this last week. It was very sad. He was about a month before his 104th birthday, and was absolutely one of the pioneers of American music in the 20th century. All of the things that he did with rhythm and meter and time, and a lot of his interesting things with pitch are overlooked because of the really crazy stuff he did with tempo modulation and that kind of thing. But was one of the few double Pulitzer winners. He has 2 Pulitzer Prizes, and been listening to a lot of his music this week. And I don't know, do you guys have any thoughts you want to share about Carter, or a favorite piece or something?
A composer who, speaking of emerging composers, really turned it on and became hugely prolific in like the 1980s when he was no spring chicken then, you know. And then just continued cranking them out. You know, so he got more prolific in, not as an older composer, but as a very older composer.
Right. I know. Like I said, I had been at that 103rd birthday concert they had from 92nd Street Y last year, and there were probably, I don't know, 3 or 4 world premieres on that concert. Guy was 103. I mean, give me a break. You know, it's nuts.
The same percussionist that I roomed with that I talked about earlier, we, you know, both got into Elliot Carter and checked a bunch of scores out from the library at the same time, and figured out what tempo modulation was, and figured out how to do the math, and sat and practiced executing tempo modulations from one to the next together. It was good times.
Yeah. You know, something that's interesting, by the way, speaking of age, I mean, Elliot Carter, I mean, everybody knows that quote that was written in the New York Times, I guess, now that is paying attention. But I said, when I started writing what I wanted to write, that's when people would pay attention, right?
Right.
But, you know, when he was around 40, you know, that's when things kind of changed for him. And I think if I have the story right, he went off into the desert and kind of wrote one of those string quartets, you know.
His first string quartet.
Right, yeah. And I think, you know, what's interesting is that he was 40, again, past Mozart's death. So it's like, but that's when he's first started to like come into his own, after he was writing those kind of pseudo-Americana Copland-esque pieces, which, by the way, I think are really cool. But he did it after 40. So there's hope for us all.
Yeah.
And if he can do that after 40, if he can write his best works when he's 80 or 90, or some of his best works, you know, I mean, I think that's pretty amazing. Now we all just have to take care of ourselves and go to the gym and eat well.
That's right.
We'll to 100.
Does anybody have a favorite piece? An Elliot Carter deep cut? I have one.
You have a deep cut?
I'm very partial to the
deep
cello
cut
sonata.
What do you got?
Well, it's a newer piece. It's not brand new, but I think it's within the last 10 years easily. And it was featured. It was somewhere, and it might have been a part of some concert or something that I was reading about. But Hioku, I think is how you say it, for 2 clarinets. The recording that's commercially available is Richard Stoltzman, and I apologize to his wife because I don't want to just say his wife, but it's Richard Stoltzman and his wife, and I don't know her name, playing, and they do a fantastic job. And any of you guys who remember anything about the way my clarinet trio sounds and the way the clarinets relate to each other, I was trying to completely rip off what Elliot Carter was doing in this duet. So it's an absolutely great piece, the way he's able to, you know, sometimes the instruments relate to each other in some sort of really very obvious way, and then sometimes they're doing their own thing, and then sometimes their own thing has a varying degree of its own sort of internal logic, so it sounds like gibberish, or it sounds like its own thing, or it sounds like counterpoint to the other thing, and how it oscillates between those kinds of feel is something that's kind of the thing I was going after in that piece, I think.
I think my favorite, and this is not necessarily a very deep cut. I mean, it's not one of the string quartets, but in as much as that, it is not it is a deep cut. Is the piano concerto? There's so much cool. It's a lot of the crazy rhythmic stuff in the string quartets is hard to perceive because they're so divergent. The different rhythmic parts are so divergent from one another, but there's a lot of stuff in the piano concerto that almost has a pretty rock and groove to it that I really enjoy. So if you don't know that piece, check it out. Anybody else have anything before we move on? I don't want to cut anybody off of Elliott Carter talk.
No, I just want to say I've always been partial to the cello sonata.
Oh yeah,
which is even as giving, I think, some of the best examples of metric modulation. It's beautiful. It's a double whammy.
There's a great NPR tribute, audio version that I'm gonna link to in the show notes if anybody cares to listen to sort of a tribute / overview. If you don't know a lot about Elliott Carter, easy to listen to. NPR does a good job. I'll have that in the show notes.
Sounds like a plan.
We don't want to get overtly political on the show any more than necessary, but there is something that's worth mentioning. Alex Ross wrote a long piece, and I have to admit I haven't read it all, basically addressing the idea of how in the election things seems to be swinging towards marriage equality and gay rights, and how that's affected him in his life as sort of an artist and a thinker. And I think it's worth mentioning because, there are lots of gay composers, so they're a part of our constituency. And congratulations to them taking another step towards, equality, and it's a long time coming.
And if you haven't read Alex Ross's piece in The New Yorker, and you can read it online, and you can also read it in the magazine, which has nothing to do with music, though there is, I think, at least one reference to John Cage.
There is.
It's a great article, and my only concern is that they'll realize what an awesome writer he is about non-musical things, and he'll start doing more of that stuff. But it's a good thing, and you'll I think be glad that you read it, because I know you will all read it because I told you to.
Right.
Obama's inauguration music.
Yeah.
Yep.
We
need to start rifling through the stories now.
Boom.
Sam, headlines.
Okay. There's a poll put out by, is it WQXR?
Yeah.
Sure.
Asking people what kind of music should be played at Obama's second inauguration, and they give you these choices: a classic American composer, a contemporary composition, a large choral work, a grand opera aria, seriously, and a 19th century European composer, which, seriously,
did you see what was shocking about that? I looked
What's
at
that?
I voted
the
for
results,
the obvious choice, which is contemporary for me, obviously.
Right.
For that. But then I looked at the pie chart that came up on the next page.
Yeah.
And
that's
overwhelmingly, people wanted a American piece, but not necessarily something contemporary.
Yeah.
So what is that saying? Come on.
They want to hear Aaron Copland.
Right. But why is it that what represents America is something that, and by the way, of course, you all picked up on, I'm sure if you saw this, what was his name? The music, Aaron Copland's music being used for
Rick Perry.
Rick Perry.
This is Rick Perry
like
ad from last year, yeah.
I love that just sends it home, man. It's like, what you value, you don't even know,
Obliviousness.
Right.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. I thought that was a little bit, not surprising, but a little disappointing. I'm like, don't we have any contemporary composers who people say, wow, this represents who we are now?
I don't think anybody knows any contemporary composers. Do you think they actually know what they're... I mean, they know John Williams.
They know Philip Glass because he was on South Park.
Yeah.
Sure.
Right?
Well,
let's hope that they would not ask Philip Glass.
We're on a schedule. We don't have time for Philip Glass.
The first inauguration was a John Williams arrangement of the Shaker of Simple Gifts, right?
Well, it was sort of a reworking / original / whatever.
Okay,
yeah, it was John Williams though.
It was an Americana focused
Yeah.
piece, though, right?
Yeah.
So what do you?
Yeah.
That's like kind of a mix of classic American and contemporary. Would you say that's like an appropriate middle ground that you would like to see, or do you just want strictly brand new? This is a perfect
I want
Somebody
opportunity.
who's
Elliot
not
Carter.
scary to the blue hairs, but is an actual contemporary, doing it right now composer.
Okay,
like
here's what I
Nico
think.
Muley could write something that would sound pleasant.
Yeah, but
and
he's
everybody
half
would like
British.
it.
Half British.
That's true. He's an expat. No, he lives over there.
I'm sorry, Rob. Go ahead.
Oh no, I think all those choices actually. Why can't it be a young composer writing something fresh and brand new that represents America? And it doesn't. If they want to get all political about it, doesn't have to be a white dude. They can pick a woman or somebody who's on the other side of the fence, or somebody who's Latino or something. Fine. But just pick something maybe that's contemporary that represents us. And of all the presidents, I don't know if in our lifetime we'll ever see a presidential couple more into the arts than these two are. I mean, they really love. They're always going to museums together. They love classical music. They host classical things at the White House all the time, events. So that's my take on it. Although, of course, probably like all of you, but I'm really passionate about wanting to represent who we are now, not the vision that we have ourselves back in 1945,
Or 1863.
or 63, right? Yeah.
Right.
So I think it's possible.
Yeah.
Not
Yeah.
everything. You got to get past the dissonant.
I just want to make it clear to the inaugural committee that I'm available.
He's
You
American.
go. That's awesome. Great plug.
Sam Mercedes. There you go. There's his contact information right there in the lower third. You can
There you
can
go.
find him on Twitter. Now that if that ever if the White House inauguration committee got a hold of you over Twitter,
Yeah, direct
Yeah.
message.
then we know we've changed the world.
All right, we're not
we're
using
we're
news
doing a
discipline.
terrible job of burning through these quickly.
Yeah.
Okay, so that one was funny though, but we should say that contemporary composition is a resounding second place with 19% of the vote compared to 55% of the vote for Aaron Copland.
Right.
Sure.
And this is all, by the way, based on fear. People are scared that if they chose a contemporary composer, they're going to turn out, that awful piece. They're going to be like, oh, what were we thinking? We didn't.
Well, not awful, but just like unpalatable to a large cross section. My whipping boy for this is always they're afraid they're going to get the Roger Sessions violin concerto.
Right. Okay.
Not that there's anything wrong with that.
Right.
No, he's just my traditional whipping boy when
Sure.
I'm looking for someone to use as an example as something that most people wouldn't like.
So
Okay,
Go ahead.
moving on.
Moving on. Speaking of stepping into the 21st century, the Brussels Philharmonic is making a big change. They are going to some digital music stands. They have a donation of 100 Samsung Galaxy Note 10s, which they will be using to display their music. So fingers crossed. Hope nothing goes wrong. Hope everybody charges their battery. Hope nobody's computer crashes, because that would be a major problem.
Because that never happens on Android.
Well, that never happens on any computer.
Well, here's my feeling.
It's going to happen at some point.
It's
just
going,
gonna
yeah,
happen.
it's absolutely going to happen.
It would be scary to do it in performance, but I think depending on how the interface works and how you're able to, depending on what kind of controls you're given through the system for rehearsals, it could be a fantastic tool.
Absolutely. And
Especially
and we
for like
don't-
a middle school when you say everybody start here, boing, and it pulls their music to where they need to start with a flashing arrow.
right, and we don't know what kind of software, what kind of apps they're using. This CNET article is hilarious. It says with special orchestra software installed. Special orchestra software. My concern is that they're small. This is
They
a
look pretty
10.1 inch tablet. This is not a Samsung Galaxy Tab 2, but this is my 10.1 inch Android tablet, and this is not very big, right? This is a violin part, and this is a 9x12 score, right? Okay, so let me get these both in the camera. 9x12 score tablet, right?
Yeah.
My preferred score size when I set my music is 11x14. Like, these are, there's going to be a lot more page turns, but I guess if you don't have to put anything down or like reach up and turn the thing, that's less of a deal. But it seems like you're losing a lot here. I mean, I hope they make it work. and the tablet that they have is probably the best one for it because it's designed to work with a very high-tech stylus for like writing notes and stuff. But it seems like
you all know that this. You probably know this, but these have been around for years.
Oh yeah, I mean, I remember like 10 or 15 years ago reading about some kind of LCD music stand that it wasn't a touchscreen, but you could control it with a foot pedal or whatever, and it's just
right.
And those seem much more reliable to me because they're all plugged into something and networked. And I suppose these are networked over Wi-Fi or something, but
yeah,
it seems really dangerous to have a bunch of tablets on music stands. What could possibly go wrong?
Getting them knocked over too.
On the bright side, the stands could be like really small, and
True.
you could see everything around really easily. I think that would be very cool.
Yeah.
Well, I think what I'm hoping, although I don't see this ever happening, but because Apple and all these companies that make tablets are so money driven about everything. I would love, when they just announced, I was so crestfallen when they announced a smaller iPad. I was like, oh, that's the opposite direction. No, we need one that's fits 9x12 or something paper,
There are. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I think, no, they exist. I know they exist, but they're not mass produced on a level, they're like these, what do you call it? Wacom, those tablets. Yeah, Wacom,
But there are some Windows 8 machines because that's very touch-oriented operating system that have tablet things that are enormous.
Yeah.
So maybe that could work. But I agree. It's got to be big. It's got to be much bigger, especially for a percussionist or a bassist that has to stand so far away.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Like that.
Oh, are you kidding me? As a marimba player? Well, my recent thing now is I'm going to start memorizing everything that I play on my instrument, but because that's obviously the most freeing if you can get to that point.
Yeah.
But I've been obsessing over this because I can't stand. Imagine, okay, it's already difficult enough turning pages, right? I mean, just for any musician.
Yeah.
Then if you're holding 4 mallets, it's even more difficult. Now, what if you're holding 6?
Right.
It's insane. I feel like a clown, So, yeah.
And if Phil Sink in our chat room quips that this definitely does not meet the MOLA guidelines. Musicians orchestra. The Major Orchestra Library Association has very strict guidelines for what orchestral parts should look like and how big the staff should be and how big the paper should be and how big the margin should be and what kind of tape you should use. Librarians are very picky people. I don't want to go too far against librarians because they do the Lord's work in the crazy stuff they have to deal with, but they have some very strict guidelines, and this clearly does not meet any of them.
That sounds like a job opportunity waiting to happen to me.
Oh, man.
Somebody needs to start preparing a resume for the job that will exit with
all right,
those
this
people
is my new job. I'm going to be the IT librarian person at the next big orchestra that does this.
Digital distribution and display standards and practices.
That's right. That's what I'm getting. Here's my contact information if anybody would like to get a hold of me to work for your orchestra. I'm happy to set you up with some
what are your
sweet
salary
tablets.
Dave?
All right, let's move it along.
Yeah.
We're terrible at this.
The Minnesota Opera is commissioning an opera based on The Manchurian Candidate, which has been made into a movie twice.
Featuring Denzel Washington.
Yep.
Right.
And if you're not familiar, it's basically somebody concocts a secret agent that they install in American politics, and that person becomes president, but that person is actually a secret agent. That's the Cliff Notes version. Commissioning Kevin Putz. Is it Putz?
Yeah, Kevin Putz. He just won
Kevin
the
Putz,
Pulitzer.
who won the Pulitzer last year for
Silent Night.
Silent Night, with librettist Mark Campbell. Naxos.
Happy birthday.
It turns 25. Good article about the history of Naxos and sort of the things they've been through in the music business by Anne Majette.
Great article. You should absolutely read this
yeah.
Washington Post article by Anne Majette. She talks about all the changes and how they've come from this kind of fourth-rate label with these very low-paid musicians recording really obscure rap. Though that was cool that they recorded really obscure rap. They want to record everything, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's their mission, is to just have everything on record.
Which is fantastic.
Which having somebody out there that's wanting to make sure that we get, all of the collected symphonies of X, Y, and Z, That's something that I would
valuable.
like to have.
Yeah. And they record, we should say, a fair amount of new music. And they've changed the kinds of things that they record and who they record. And they've jumped on every new kind of distribution that has come up through technology. And they're doing a great job. One of the things that I thought was really interesting before we move on, because, again, we're doing a terrible job at doing this quickly.
The YouTube thing.
Yes. So they are using YouTube Content ID. And this is one of their primary revenue streams right now.
75% of their revenue.
Yeah, is through people using their music in YouTube things. And if you've done anything on YouTube, you get these Content ID match angry notices when you use something that somebody thinks is under their copyright. And sometimes they can take your video down, but other times they can just put ads on it and make money that way. And it's a brilliant mechanism for getting people out of hot water with YouTube and the law, but it's also a way for these companies to make money, and Naxos has apparently been knocking it out of the park that way. We've talked in the past about the UK Sibelius team getting shut down because Avid, who now owns Sibelius, is moving the development team to, I guess, Los Angeles, where they develop the rest of their software. Everybody was very sad. I was very upset because these people are wonderful and developed Sibelius from the beginning, and they do a great job of it.
And Dave's a Sibelius guy.
I am a Sibelius guy, I should say. But they're wonderful people, and most of them were recently picked up. They were hired. This is not like a wholesale thing. They were not like acquired or anything as a group. But many of them were hired very recently by Steinberg, who makes Cubase. And they are going to... Steinberg didn't mention that these are all the Sibelius people in their press release. They just said, we're opening a new research and development center in London, and it's going to be great. And then other people have reported, oh yeah, these are all the people from Sibelius UK.
Okay, hey man, guys, do you mind if I make a little plug? Because
go for it.
I just got to say something. I feel so bad about what's happening with Sibelius. I'm not a Sibelius user up front. I use Finale. But I feel it's a really horrible thing that's happening because I think the competition for Finale has always been a good thing.
Yeah.
It made Finale actually improve by leaps and bounds.
So much better.
Yeah, exactly. So, but I just want to say, because Finale gets a lot of flack for some very good reasons sometimes, but it's come a long way. And I feel like, not that I think Sibelius is a great program. I've taught both when I was teaching, but I think people shouldn't overlook if they're sitting there, especially if they're young. Finale's actually, just yesterday, I was with a composer friend of mine. He looked at one of my scores and said, oh, that looks great. Is that in Sibelius? And this has happened to me like 50 times. Yeah. I'm like, no, that's Finale. I mean, if you look closely at the tremolos, you can tell, or certain markings, if it's Sibelius or not because of the font. But you know what? It's like, if Sibelius, I hope they improve. I hope everything works out someday, somehow. But if not, it's not like Finale's. It's a pretty good program. I don't know. I'm happy with it. So.
Right. And that's a very good point. And like the worst possible thing for everybody that uses computer music notation would be for Sibelius to get crappy in the hands of Avid, because not only is that bad for Sibelius users, it's bad for Finale users because nobody's pushing Finale to make their software better. And I completely agree. And I think we may have even discussed that when we first talked about this, that Sibelius really did make Finale better. And hopefully this new team at Steinberg can help make both of those better. The more competition there is, the better it is. And we should say there's no guarantee that these guys are working on a new notation program. Right now, Steinberg doesn't have anything like that. That's designed for engraving the way Sibelius and Finale are designed for engraving. Maybe they're going to start working on a new software package. Maybe they're just going to incorporate these guys into some of their other software that they work on. It would be great if a year or two from now, Steinberg says, hey, look, we got this new notation thing. You're going to dig it. I will use the heck out of that free trial for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, I'm curious to see if they come up with something, because like Sibelius and Finale can both sort of like work their way into being a sequencing kind of operation instead of a notation software, but because of the way it happened for them, it's kind of like they are a notation software and then they're figuring out ways to interface, in a different way. If it's interesting to see if a company like this would build a product considering, a notation product from this ground up that considers the way it might interface with other products that they make, from the beginning is an interesting idea.
That's something that Avid started to deal with after it acquired Sibelius. It has slowly built in more hooks to other Avid things. And what I think would be interesting is that if they're going to build something from the ground up, they have the opportunity to build in hooks for other devices, for things like iPads and Android tablets, and something that could really, make this digital music stand thing a reality that is reliable and worthwhile and usable for these major orchestras. If they could do something like that, and again, that's the kind of thing that would be so much easier to build from nothing than to kind of kludge into...
To shoehorn it into something that already has existed for a long time.
Firsthand, probably, I don't know, you seem like you're all Sibelius users. Is that true? Or
Finale?
No, we're about 50-50, I think.
Yeah.
50-50? Okay. So, but I'll say firsthand, I've been using Finale from the beginning, so I've seen all of their ups and downs, like stupid things they've done, great things they've done. And, but they've always had to, sometimes they wholesale will fix something that was horrible to begin with, and then they fixed it, but it was a gigantic undertaking because they had built up so much code around, say, like their score manager part of the program, like how you move the staves around. And then they rebuilt that, but it was huge. They had to write so much new code. But like what you're saying, if they start fresh with this new company and build something from the ground up, you know what? That might eclipse both of these programs.
Yeah, but wasn't that Sibelius's mission originally? Wasn't it just here's what Finale does, and here are the bad things about it. Let's make it good and start from the ground up. I thought that was like their original idea.
But it took them a while to get to a point where they could actually compete on a feature by feature basis.
Yeah,
they were like first generations of anything is going to be tricky, but a first generation of a thing that is designed to be so powerful as to compete with something like Finale. Like imagine trying to create something today that would compete with Photoshop. That's like a 10-year undertaking, and it took Sibelius at least five years to get to the point where they actually could do all the things that Finale users could do. And I suffered under those earlier
but
versions.
You stuck with it.
Do you remember? Do you guys? I don't know how old you all are, but the first Finale stuff that came out, or Score, I'm not so sure of, and then there was something called Professional Composer. This was like...
I don't remember Professional Composer.
I mean, this is when I was an undergraduate student, this thing, all the beams were flat. You were printing on like these inkjet printers that the ink would give out. It looked horrible. But major composers were starting to use this stuff, and I mean, if I often feel like I wish I had saved all these copies of this old stuff that was so awful looking for young composers now. Like, see what we suffered through for you. I mean, look what you had to deal with.
There's so many, and like now that we've solved all those kinds of problems, we can work on much cooler things that this stuff can do. Cuthbert, which I'm pretty sure is Adam Cuthbert in the chat room, is saying that we need a notation interface to be seamlessly integrated with DAWs, which is fantastic because Cube Steinberg has some awesome other audio stuff. And if a notation interface could work with a DAW back and forth really easily, it would be amazing for a lot of electroacoustic music. So I totally agree. Thank you. Thank you for pointing that out, Adam.
For those who don't know, like something like Pro Tools or Logic or Steinberg has their Cubase, so that would be a good opportunity. Yeah.
So the last bit of news.
Cubase is a very popular program too.
Yes.
Very popular. Lots of industry permeation.
Last bit of news to talk about. Evan Zipperin is leaving Bang on a Can to work on other things. From what I can tell from the releases that they've sent out, it's not like breaking up the band or anything. It's just that he had a lot going on and wants to be able to devote time to other projects. So we wish him and Bang on a Can all the best. We would talk about them some more, but we're getting pretty late, and we're
one quick thing.
Go.
By the way, my wife is a clarinet player, so put my contact information. To hire her to be in Bang on a Can, contact me.
You guys are shameless. I love it.
She's really good. She's got her doctorate with Elsevier. I mean, that's pedigree we're talking here. So, yep. Keep us in mind.
Oh, man. I can't. We've been really bad about that shameless plug thing today.
Oh, I think it's great. You have to, man. You guys are like, you got to do that. There's nothing wrong with that,
So I guess if we feel shame, it's not really a shameless plug. It's a shameful plug.
That's right.
We're gonna bail on this movie, this Late Quartet. We'll talk about this movie.
If you see it, let us know how you like it.
Yeah, if you get a chance, is this playing everywhere?
I think so.
Okay, we should all go see it this week, and we'll have a little movie review.
Yeah.
So we'll do that next week. A Late Quartet. It's oh man, I'm blanking on it. Christopher Walken,
Seymour Hoffman, and Christopher Walken.
Yeah, it's a bunch of great actors playing a string quartet. So you get some opportunity to see some great pantomime playing.
You get the cringe-inducing thing when you see people who look uncomfortable holding their instrument, trying to look all passionate about playing their instrument.
Oh wait, I have a great story about that.
Okay, go ahead.
Very quick. Okay, so my wife plays violin here in New York and does a lot of crazy gigs. And one of the gigs she just did a couple months ago was playing for this new show that just opened called 666 Park Avenue.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And yeah, right. Well, the very first episode was about the quote unquote New York Philharmonic, which of course it wasn't. They're all just freelance musicians. But anyway, one of the main parts of the story was that there was this violinist who was possessed by the devil, and so his fingers had to start bleeding while he was playing. He was the concertmaster. So I guess the Glenn Dicterow fill-in, And so they shot for people have no idea. There was 12 straight hours of shooting just for this one scene, or these couple of scenes. And just because he had to look just right, look like he was playing the instrument, fingers had to look, the blood had to look just right. But it took so long, all for this one.
I've seen it, and the scene of the orchestra playing is 5 seconds or something.
Yeah. Oh, you barely see them. You see them for a millisecond, But anyway, I just think it's so horrible when actors try to play and they can't. So I just think this is another job you can all do. You could be consultants.
There you go.
Compositional performer consultants to make sure it looks good. Right?
Right. That's a gig, right?
I want to make it look good.
Yeah.
Right.
That's my tagline.
I'll make
it look not terrible. Thanks, Sam.
I was trying to cut the conversation off and move it along.
Sam would like us to move on to our pick of the week, which is, of course, from our guest Robert Patterson from his new CD of 6 Mile Marimba music. We are going to listen to a little bit of Clarinetrix, which is streaming now for free. So you should, after this show is over, watch the rest of the show first. But after the show's over, follow the link on our show notes to listen to the whole thing, because it's very cool. Robert, do you have anything you want to say to maybe set up this excerpt? We're just going to play a little bit off the top.
So the title came from I have a librettist I work with named David Cody, who's actually the lead theater critic of Time Out New York. And Dave, his former girlfriend, Megan, is the clarinetist in my group. And his nickname for her, at least in a couple of his blog entries way back, was the Clarinetrix. And so I was used to joke with them. And so, Dave, Megan, what do I not know about your relationship that you're not telling me? And they were like, no, it's not like that. It's just a funny name. And
it's like that.
Yeah, right. So the name just stuck with me, and I thought it was such a funny name. I thought, I got to write a piece about a bass clarinet playing dominatrix with Megan playing, and she was so uncomfortable with that. By the way, at the premiere, she's like, "Do I really have to do this? Do I have to dress up as a dominatrix?" I'm like, "No, just wear something, mini skirt, whatever thing." Get up. She did it. It was great. She totally played it up. And but that was the inspiration. So there's all these slap tongues and marim shots, which is hitting the shaft of the sticks on the edges of the bars to create this loud whip sound. Anyway, that's what inspired it. So yeah.
Well, here it is then. This is an excerpt from Clarinetrix by our guest Robert Patterson. All right, that was an excerpt from Clarinetrix by our guest, Robert Patterson. Robert, thank you so much for sharing that with us. That was great.
Thank you. Thanks.
That piece gave me the vapors, Robert. Sultry.
Wow.
Yeah, sassy as well.
Oh, thanks.
So I think ordinarily we would hang out and talk about this more than we probably have time to today. But like you said, there's a lot of imagery in there, and it's very interesting how just with the title Clarinetrix, you can bring all of those sounds a lot more meaning.
Titles are important.
Yeah, well, and it's weird. Dave and I are now working on an opera that is. At least the working title right now, it's called Fetish. And so it's in one of the operas is called Safe Word. It's a three one-act opera.
Safe Word. Nice.
Right. So people are going to start thinking that I obsess over these particular subjects or that I'm deeply involved in that at all, and I'm not,
Well, it answers the question I had. I was listening to that, and the slap tongue sections, I thought, oh, that's not slap tonguing, that's spanking. And then I thought, oh, wait a minute. Does that mean I'm dirty or does it mean Rob's dirty? So it means that you're dirty since you're making this other thing.
This doesn't even hold a stick to somebody like David Del Tredici,
Sure.
Oh yeah.
So I mean, I feel like I'm merely scratching the surface of his entire world,
He brings his dominatrix with him.
Yeah,
it says it on the score actually. Dominatrix not included.
Right.
All right, just a question, Rob. What is the safe word?
Well, that's the key, at least in that opera.
All
right.
Tune in next time for the thrilling conclusion. Rob, before we wrap this up, do you have anything that you want to plug? I know you have some concerts coming up. Tell us where we can find your music.
Well, if you visit I have CDs on Amazon. You can visit my site and get links there. My sheet music's published by Bill Hollab Music. Same publisher, by the way, as Kevin Putz, who you mentioned earlier, and a bunch of other really great composers. And I have some concerts coming up now and later next summer. I have a piece with Dogs of Desire, Albany Symphony, that I'm writing. I have a couple cool things. But yeah, this upcoming concert is at the Rubin Museum of Art in New York on the 14th. I think it's at 7:30 in the evening.
7 o'clock.
7 o'clock, sorry. And and it's featuring me and marimbist Makoto Nakura. We're both playing marimba pieces. And also in that same evening, releasing 2 different CDs of marimba music. So if you're in New York and have nothing better to do and there's no hurricanes, geez, please show up. We'd love to see you there.
That's great.
And we'll have links to that on the show notes.
Exactly.
Great. Yeah.
Excellent.
So that's going to do it for this week's SoundNotion. Thank you to everyone who joined us live in chat. We've been most helpful and most entertaining. If you would like to join us in chat, we do the show every Sunday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, and you can visit soundnotion.tv/live to watch the show and participate in chat. Apologies, you need a Ustream account to do that, but those are free. And certainly worth the slight pain of setting up to begin with. To watch the rest of the shows in our archive, to read anything about any of the stuff we talked about this week, or to comment after the fact, you can go to our site, soundnotion.tv/SN. You can leave us a note there. You can also connect with us on Facebook or Twitter. We're at SoundNotion. We're also all individually on Twitter. We'd love to continue all of these conversations with you after the fact, especially since we had to cut some interesting things short this week, but it was totally worth it to talk to Rob about some of his cool stuff. If you'd like to support this show or any of the shows at SoundNotion TV, you can go to our site again, soundnotion.tv, and there are links to donate on the right. But the best way, because it's free to you, to support our show is to use the Amazon search box that we have there on the right side. If you just buy whatever you're buying on Amazon, it could be music that we talked about, it could be anything you want, Christmas gifts, search for it through that little box. And we'll get a tiny little commission, and it costs you nothing, but it really helps us out. So thank you so much for those of you that have done that already, and thank you in advance for those of you that will do it in the future. This show and all our shows are available in the iTunes store, so be sure to go there, subscribe for free to catch every episode. SoundNotion's introduction includes music by Patrick Gullo and video by Tyler Lepp. Thanks again for watching. We'll see you back next week.
Rick Perry.